Good morning. Well, I'm going to take up a challenge this morning. I have felt challenged for some time to speak about the last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation. I've tried to put it off because to speak about this in just 5-minute sections is in fact quite difficult. But the challenge is there and I feel it getting stronger. So for some time I'm going to be speaking in this way. If I find that I'm capable of fulfilling this task, then I will quite simply bring it to a close. I start today by just thinking about this last book and seeing where it actually fits. John, the apostle of Jesus, had been imprisoned on the island of Patmos. When he's on that island, he is given a vision, and he says quite simply that God sent his angel to give him this vision, that he might speak and send it to all the 7 churches of Asia. Now, I've dealt with these 7 churches of Asia before, and I've shown you quite simply that although they were individual churches, yet in some strange way, they represent all the churches of God from the very beginning to the very end of time. And so when this message goes out to the churches of Asia, in fact, Jesus is sending a message to churches right throughout time and to us at the present time as well. He is saying, this is what is going to happen. We need to know it because as we look at the society in which we're living, even at the present day, we can see developments, we can see things happening, and it can confuse us. Somehow we feel that God is getting out of control, that somehow the enemy is winning. But remember Jesus in his own lifetime, speaking to his own apostles, he says, when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, when you hear about earthquakes and famines, when you hear about calamities taking place in the world, then he said, look up. These are in fact the birth pangs of the end of the age. This is what is going to come. These will be the sign of its approach. And as we look up and as we experience these birth pangs, our hearts are at one and the same time depressed about what we are seeing. We truly do mourn for righteousness in the world. But at the same time, part of us is rejoicing because we know that the promises of God are about to be fulfilled. Now, many people are worried by the book of Revelation because it's a very complex book. It has many images. It has many messages. And as they read through it, sometimes it just doesn't make sense to them. Well, I'm going to try and take this book, or at least part of this book, and I'm going to try to make sense that you might be able to follow what it is that Jesus is saying and understand what it is he's trying to share with us. I said I'm only going to take part of this book because the 7 churches of Asia, well, I dealt with that in a previous series, and I showed how each of these churches expressed a different experience of Jesus, a different experience of fellowship, and Jesus compliments some of them, criticizes some of them, as it goes through from the very beginning, the church of Ephesus, the apostolic church, until the church of Laodicea, the final church before his return. We, I believe, are now living in the church of Laodicea. That's the place where we are. But it's a very dangerous church as well, because in this church, people think they can decide for themselves what they should do. And Jesus gives a warning to this church to be very careful about decisions they're making and what they want to do in their relationships with one another and with God. We can look around the world at the moment and we can see somehow the church is in confusion. And that's exactly the confusion that Jesus tells them about and warns them about, even from these churches of 7 churches of Asia. And so we come to the beginning of this particular book and we look at it. And we find John a prisoner on the island of Patmos, gets this vision. Now, just one short aside before we start. I believe that when John was released from prison on Patmos, he returned to Ephesus. And as he thought about the visions he had received, he looked at the Gospels which were then currently in use throughout the church. And he heard stories about Bethlehem and the birth of Jesus. He heard stories about the miracles of Jesus. He heard stories about the sayings of Jesus, all of which were pertinent. But he had had a vision of Jesus in glory, and he decides that we needed more than that. So I believe the Gospel of John was written after Patmos, and he decides to write to the church and says, in the beginning was the Word, because he wants to emphasize who Jesus was. And he's come to this realization because of this vision he had been given, which I'm now going to try and share with you. Amen.